Hi, my name's Chris Gregg, and my talk today is about navigating the transition to a net zero economy. It's a great pleasure to be here with you as I talk about something that is a real passion for me, is how do we navigate this path. As background, I want to reflect on the fact that most countries, states, companies, cities have made very ambitious pledges to reduce their emissions to net zero by around the middle of the century. This is sometimes motivated by authentic care for the planet, but oftentimes it's motivated by coercion, whether it be from shareholders, NGOs, or their peers. To achieve these goals, however, we must build clean energy and industrial infrastructure at a truly astonishing speed and scale. And the models we rely on don't take into account the way we develop and build infrastructure, nor do they consider the trade-offs, whether it be with natural capital, other stakeholder interests, or financing. And this is the area that I want to explore today. I'm going to talk to you about the Net Zero America study, which Princeton undertook in 2020 and 2021. This really brought the speed, scale, and the trade-offs to life. It attracted a lot of attention in the media. It led to us doing in the order of 300 briefings across the White House, Congress, state governments, but also the private sector, companies, financiers, international organizations. And then lastly, it inspired others to follow. So we've subsequently partnered with institutions in Australia, India, China, Brazil, where we're undertaking similar studies with our partners there. So what do we mean by net zero? Well, it's basically the state where we achieve that the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere is being balanced by what we're removing from the atmosphere. And all pathways to get to net zero involve what I call 6 pillars of decarbonisation. The first is energy productivity. It's really doing more with less through a combination of efficiency and electrification. The second one is clean electricity. We need to build more solar, wind, transmission, batteries, but also firm generation options, things like nuclear, geothermal, carbon capture and storage with natural gas. These are generation sources which are always available on demand and are not dependent on the weather, like wind and solar. We need to deploy bioenergy and other zero carbon fuels and feedstocks for chemical industry. And we need to capture CO2 from emissions point sources, and we need to either utilize that into long-lived products or to store it in deep geologic formations. And then the last 2 pillars are related often to the land sector. We need to reduce non-CO2 emissions, things like methane from cattle and nitrous oxide from fertilizer use. And then we need to enhance natural land sinks, develop our forest, prevent deforestation and so forth. So these are our 6 pillars, and they form pretty much the basis of every pathway to net zero, whichever country or organization you represent. Back to Net Zero America, and it was really, I think, a unique approach around granularity, whether it be technological granularity, spatial granularity, temporal granularity. This was really where Net Zero America came into its own. I'm going to show you some examples. This is a middle of the road scenario for, in this case, renewable energy, electricity. If you look at 2020 here, you can see in the map, the blue dots, they represent wind farms. And there are some orange dots there that represent solar farms in 2020. But as you can see, they're very difficult to see. And the grey lines are transmission lines. If we fast forward to 2050 in our scenario, you see this enormous build out of wind and solar. around 3,000 gigawatts of new wind and solar, roughly equal amounts of each, and we have to build 3 times the transmission infrastructure that we have today. Really quite an extraordinary change happening across the United States. But in the same scenario, we also have carbon capture and storage, or CCS. And in 2020, we have a small amount of CO2 being transported in pipelines and injected into the subsurface, mainly to enhance the production of oil. But in 2050, we would need to build out a whole enterprise of CCS, capturing CO2 at around 2,000 facilities, bioenergy plants, cement plants, natural gas power plants, all fitted with CCS, where we're going to capture 1 billion tons a year of CO2 and inject it into formations around 6,000 feet below surface. And to make that happen, we're going to need thousands of wells, and we're going to need around 100,000 miles of new large diameter CO2 pipelines. So these maps really show this astonishing scale, but also the speed at which we have to deliver of infrastructure by 2050 in a net zero scenario. We also looked at Australia. And so with our partners down in Australia, there is a unique challenge. Australia, whilst it's a very vast continent, around the same land area as continental US, it is a relatively small economy. Our population is only 27 million, so it's 1/15 of the United States, and GDP similar. But at the time of this study, at least, we were the world's largest exporter of LNG and the largest exporter of coal. And so the challenge in Australia is to decarbonise the domestic economy, relatively small economy, by 2050, but also to transition our energy exports to clean energy exports, things like clean hydrogen or subsea transmission lines to take electricity into Asia. This becomes a much more interesting challenge. And if we forward to 2050, we see a very different picture to what we saw in the US. We see relatively modest build out of wind and solar and transmission to support the population centres near the coast, in the mostly in the southern part of the continent. But we see these vast hubs of solar and some wind to deliver clean, green hydrogen in the form of ammonia to our trading partners. And this ammonia will eventually phase in substitution for coal and LNG exports. As you can see, again, it's a big task. 3,000 gigawatts of solar, vast amounts of transmission, and of course, the clean hydrogen export infrastructure. So when we look at these maps, it can be a little overwhelming. And so we've tried to distill it down to really 4 critical challenges that we have to navigate. I call them speed limits, right? If we don't get them right, they represent speed limits. And it's this unique granularity, but also engaging with stakeholders who are impacted by the transition or engaged or influential in the transition that helps bring these to life. The first one that we talked about already is this unprecedented technology change and infrastructure build. We have to learn to build infrastructure much more rapidly, much more reliably than we have been of late. The second one, and it's critical to be able to deliver the infrastructure, is risk capital. To develop and build these new assets, we need cash, we need finance. And we need a lot more finance flowing into the clean energy and industrial sector than we have today. Then there's the sustaining social license challenge. With all this change going on at unprecedented scale and speed over multiple decades, we have to make sure our communities are on board for this transition. And the last one is the workforce mobilisation. It does require a large workforce, both professionals and trade labour, and we're going to have to mobilize people to do that. So let's talk about some of those challenges. We've talked about the infrastructure challenge, but now I want to talk about the financing challenge. To deliver net zero, we'll have to see somewhere between 3 and 6 times the flow of capital than we have been used to in the energy and industrial sectors. In the case of Australia, as an example, you can see here, in a business as usual world where we weren't committing to decarbonise the economy, we might have to mobilise around $1.5 trillion between now and the middle of the century. But in these low carbon scenarios where we're actually transitioning both our domestic economy and our export economy to a net zero economy, then we're talking about lifting that to somewhere around $8 trillion by mid-century. This is enormous amount of change, and it's going to require a rethink in how the finance sector, the government, and the industry is able to work together. Social license. This is really having communities endorse and accept and support this transition throughout the next few decades. And whilst the infrastructure challenge and the financing challenge are kind of national, global challenges, social license is often local. And so we have to get very granular to provide that local perspective. So looking at the renewable infrastructure, if we look at 2020, we've zoomed in here to St. Louis in Missouri, and you can see virtually no wind and solar in that region. Fast forward to 2050, and you see this tremendous build-out. This is just 25 years, right? And we're building lots and lots of wind farms, the blue shaded area, and lots of solar farms, the red area, in and around St. Louis. And we're going to have to make sure that landowners, community groups, residents are accepting of this and supportive of this. But so far, we're not doing a good job of this. We've seen rising community opposition to many low carbon project types, solar, wind, CCS, but particularly linear infrastructure, things like electricity transmission lines and CO2 pipelines have been opposed in many, many states. And so this leads to growth in restrictions by local regulation. And we're also seeing evidence of declining trust across energy and industrial companies. So we're going to have to turn this around, right? If we're going to be able to commit to this transition in these kind of timeframes, we have to be a lot better at dealing with local communities. And last one I wanted to talk about is the workforce requirement. On this panel here, you can see the grey panel is the business as usual case for America, and the coloured panels are the net zero scenarios, different types of scenarios. And you can see, depending on the scenario, depending on whether it's heavily dependent on renewables or more dependent on CCS, we need more or less workers, but we need more across all of them. So whether it be 2 times or 4 times the workforce, this is a major challenge. And it's a major opportunity, of course, because everybody would like to see jobs created. There are some risks, however, because it's not homogeneous. What we find is there are states and counties where we see sharp declines in employment, but there are also counties where we see a huge influx required of workers. And so managing this in a way that supports communities, doesn't leave any behind, but also supports communities where we need a big transition of workforce into the community is going to be really critical. Last but not least, I want to end on what this means for the geoscience industry. Well, net zero globally means lots of geoscience professionals. For CCS, we need to be capturing and storing billions of tons of CO2 permanently, safely, and cost-effectively into deep geologic formations. This is the work of geoscience professionals. Hydrogen. We need to build a new hydrogen economy in the world that is going to be somewhere between 0.5 billion tonnes per year and 1 billion tonnes per year. This is an increase of 5 to 10 times what the hydrogen use today is. And to be able to balance supplies and demands, we're going to need to store that in subsurface caverns that have been engineered by geoscience professionals. If we're going to build 20,000 gigawatts of wind, solar, batteries, and nuclear across the world, and it may well be more than that, we're going to need geotechnical services to support the siting of this tremendous number of new facilities. And let's not forget critical minerals. The renewable energy transition is heavily reliant on critical minerals. We estimate that the energy transition will need a 10-fold expansion of lithium, cobalt, rare earths, but a 4-fold expansion also of things that we might take for granted, like copper and nickel. And last but not least, let's think about oil and gas. Most of these pathways do involve continued oil and gas production well beyond 2050. And so that industry will need to be supported as well. So overall, the future is very bright in an energy transition world for the geoscience sector. Well, thanks for listening. I think this transition to net zero economy is one of the greatest challenges, but also one of the greatest opportunities of this century, and I hope you'll be part of it. Thank you.